The Andy Pollin Show.
We got to go after this with everything we got, figuring they're going to come with everything they got.
I'll start off by saying I'm bored, I'm broke, and I'm back.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630 starts right now.
So isn't it ironic? The legal tampering period begins in the NFL at noon today, meaning that you can talk to players on expiring contracts, and then the deals can become official on Wednesday. And now with Russell Wilson signing with the Steelers, and we'll get to that, the biggest name on the free agent market is Kirk Cousins. And it didn't matter whether the player was a fit with Washington. Dan Snyder always thought he was winning if he was outspending people to sign high-priced free agents. Albert Hainsworth, the most egregious example of that foolishness. And wouldn't it be something, well, thank God he's not, but wouldn't it be something if Dan Snyder were still the owner of the team and they have a needed quarterback? I don't think there's any question about that. And that, you know, he would make himself immediately, of course, ineligible to talk to Kirk Cousins, because if somebody from the organization reached out to Cousins, he would have gone, "Are you kidding me? Are you nuts? That guy still owns the team?" Thank God he doesn't. So there's sanity here. And even though Washington has more cap room than anybody, they got plenty of money to spend, it does not appear that they're going to be overly active. Sure, they have absolutely they have needs, but they're not going to do it all at once. They're not going to do the foolishness of 2000 where, you know, Bruce Smith and Deion Sanders and Jeff George and all that nonsense took place. No, that's not going to happen. They're going to do this in a way that it's going to take a while. And speaking of a while, we'll get to this next hour, in the 10 o'clock hour. Charlie Casserly was on John Keim's podcast. And one of the things he said about building a team, and Charlie did it in Houston as the first general manager of an expansion team. I think they came in 2002. And he said, one of the things you have to look at is if in 3 years you can project you have 12 guys on your team who are starters, you may be in contention if you have that. In other words, if you look at this year's roster and project 3 years down the road and say, oh, the 53 you have now, 12 will be starters in 3 years, you might have something. Well, there's probably only like 4, maybe 5 who might be starters 3 years down the road. So this is going to be a long rebuild. And I think you're going to see some sensible free agents sign, not blockbuster deals, and it'll take some time to do that. So we'll get to that in the next hour. Meantime, the Russell Wilson signing last night, he was given permission by the Broncos to seek out a deal. He doesn't officially hit the market, I guess, until Wednesday, but he has reportedly signed a 1-year, $1.2 million deal, and the Broncos are on the hook for the rest of it, $37.8 million for this year. Wilson put out on social media last night, year 13, grateful, and he showed an accompanying video of the Steelers and their fans. So he now heads there with Kenny Pickett in place. There was some talk that Mason Rudolph was going to be re-signed. They were going to run it back with those two, but now Wilson will wear his number 3 in black and gold. And last night, after the deal was put out, Adam Schefter talked about it with Scott Van Pelt.
Adam, we know that Pittsburgh last year struggled offensively, bottom 5 in points. Only the Jets had fewer passing touchdowns. Is the understanding that Wilson is going to Pittsburgh to be their starter? Do we have that clarity?
Well, listen, I think that Pittsburgh made it clear that it was bringing in competition for Kenny Pickett. And I think Russell Wilson doesn't go anywhere that he doesn't think that he isn't going to be the starter. Now, he's going to have to go and earn it, and he's going to have to play well. But Russell Wilson is ultra confident in his abilities and what he will bring to that franchise. You're talking about a guy that's been to 9 Pro Bowls, who's won a Super Bowl. I don't think he thinks that he's going to Pittsburgh to back up Kenny Pickett, but certainly Kenny Pickett will have the opportunity to play well this summer. We'll see how that goes, Scott.
And Adam, we know that this week will be wild, and it's off to this start on a Sunday night, and there were teams that had question at quarterback. In your understanding of how Wilson viewed the landscape, Pittsburgh provided for him the best combination of opportunity and circumstance?
Listen, he met with the Giants, an exploratory meeting. He flew from Newark to Pittsburgh and spent my understanding is, over 6 hours with Mike Tomlin, with Arthur Smith, going over what it might be like if he were to play there. And I think when he looked at those two situations, I think there was a lot about Pittsburgh that attracted him. You look at all the offensive weapons they have on the offensive side of football. You look at the way they run the football. You look at the way they play defense. And again, I believe that he feels like he can come in there and do what he does and elevate this team. Last year he was benched. He did also throw 26 touchdowns and 8 interceptions, Scott. And let's keep in mind here that for Pittsburgh, there's really no downside. The Broncos are paying his bill for this year. They're paying $38 million of his salary. Pittsburgh will pay just over $1 million. So there's really almost no downside to bringing in a guy like Russell. You're not compensating the Broncos with any picks or players. You're compensating Russell Wilson at a minimal amount. The Broncos are essentially paying his salary for the year. Why not bring him in and see how he fares against Kenny Pickett?
Yeah, why not? It's a cheap thing to do. Now, we may have ruffled some feathers with Pickett, but get over that. That's part of competing in the NFL. If he's good enough, he'll be the starting quarterback. And look, nobody's doing cartwheels over Russell Wilson. The odds of the Steelers winning the Super Bowl before the Wilson signing, 80-1. After the Wilson signing, 80-1. It's a wait and see, but it's a cheap wait and see. For just over $1 billion, you get to see. And if Russell Wilson has anything left, if they think he's a guy who can make them good, they can't win a Super Bowl with him. It's just like Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield got a lot of money to re-sign over the weekend with Tampa. You think in their heart of hearts the Bucs think they're going to win a Super Bowl with Baker Mayfield? No, but you get better, and maybe you hope that Kenny Pickett develops behind him, maybe with another chance to come in and play if Wilson doesn't play well or gets hurt. So there's a lot of things that could be in play, but also you have Mike Tomlin, who's never had a losing season, and you would think that at least with Russell Wilson, if he plays even like he played last year, 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, good enough to have a winning record. We'll spend some more time on this and other NFL. I want to jump, though, to college basketball and what a rough year this has been locally. Georgetown was supposed to take a step up. They really haven't. They've been terrible. They lost their final regular season game on Saturday at Madison Square Garden against St. John's, and then they go back there on Wednesday night to open up the Big East tournament against Providence, and that will more than likely end their season. They lost to them twice this year, but we'll see. We'll see what happens in tournament play there. They got to win 5 games in 5 days to make a miracle run to the NCAA tournament, but they did that a few years ago with Patrick Ewing, so you never know. As for Maryland, they did not have one of their best players last night. Julian Reese did dress. He did warm up with the team, didn't play. They say he had tweaked his ankle in practice. I think that's a little bit dubious, but he was at least on the bench, and without him, Maryland really wasn't competitive. They lost by 16 points to Penn State. So now they go to the Big Ten tournament on Wednesday, and they're going to play Rutgers. And I don't know, this is like, pick your poison here. Do you want to watch this or do you not want to watch it? Well, if you don't have Peacock, you can't watch it because this is going to be a Peacock game. And if you want to watch it, do you want to watch Maryland's season end in essentially a play-in game in the Big Ten tournament? Disappointment there. Women's basketball ruled the day in college basketball yesterday. I watched Caitlin Clark and Iowa not really play all that well. She had a rough shooting first half, but she made enough big shots down the stretch for Iowa to win its 3rd straight Big Ten tournament title as they knocked off a pretty good Nebraska team. Nebraska had beaten Maryland in the semifinals. They look good. And Caitlin Clark was just good enough. She made the big shots. She had a steal to seal the game, and now it's on to the NCAA tournament, and you can probably make them a number 1 seed, which is going to be really good for ESPN, which has the tournament and the Final Four, and she is the biggest draw in college basketball, period, men or women. That has been the case, and we'll get to some more on what happened yesterday in women's college basketball, including the fight that took place in the SEC championship game between South Carolina and LSU, and the reactions of the coaches, very different, the two of them, Dawn Staley and Kim Mulkey, very, very different reactions on that. But this is probably not on your radar, but it's one of those where you go, oh, God, that's cringeworthy. I have sort of been in this position before when I was at a radio station, and I had been relieved of my duties, but told that I could put together tapes and do some fill-in work. I was still at the station when the new general manager came in, and he was glad-handing everybody and introduced himself to me, and I said, yeah, but I've been fired. And so it puts you in sort of an awkward position. He went, oh, and just sort of walked away. So last night, Utah State playing in the Mountain West tournament, they lost in the first round, and it wasn't even close. They lost to Boise State 85-49, and the coach is Kayla Ard. She has not been successful there as a head coach. In 4 years, she won 24 games, so that's 6 wins a season. She won a combined 9 games over the last 2 years, 5-25 overall, and 2-16 in the Mountain West this past season. So she's answering questions about this blowout loss, and then there's one more that's asked.
And how do you plan to rebuild for next season?
I'm not going to be rebuilding. I just coached my last game at Utah State. I spoke with Diana, and they're going in a different direction, and I respect her decision, and I hope they get a really good coach in. I'm assuming that's going to be the last question. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Coach.
Yeah. You've been fired. Ooh. Yeah, Diana is Diana Sabu, who is the athletic director, and with a 4-year record of 24-90. I don't think she had much choice on that. It's just, why? I don't know. She fired her before the news conference? Sort of odd timing there. Why don't you just at least let her do her last news conference? But she let her know before, and so she said, yeah, well, I've been fired. At least she was very professional, answered questions about the game, and then I've been fired. Yeah, very uncomfortable there. All right, yesterday we had the SEC championship game, and you've got South Carolina, which has had an undefeated season. They had a buzzer beater to get to the championship game. They're playing LSU, which you remember last year they lost. They won. They won the national championship last year as they beat Iowa. That was the Caitlin Clark game that was one that is certainly remembered, but one that she lost. She has not won a national championship, and there was some things that went on between she and Angel Reese, the star of LSU, who started out her career at Maryland, that were uncomfortable for some at the end. But anyway, we move on, and yesterday in the SEC championship game, South Carolina remained undefeated. But with 2 minutes left in the game, LSU's Flau'jae Johnson elbowed Ashton Watkins with an intentional foul, and then South Carolina's Camila Cardoso charged into her and pushed her onto the court. And so they kicked a lot of people out of the game, and Cardoso was actually suspended for the first game of the NCAA tournament. As soon as it was over, Dawn Staley, the coach of South Carolina, was very apologetic for what had happened.
I just want to apologize to the basketball community. When you're playing in championship games like this, in our league, things get heated. No bad intentions. They just tried, their emotions got so far ahead of them that sometimes these things happen. So I want to apologize for us playing a part in that, because that's not who we are and that's not what we're about. But I'm happy for the players that were able to finish the game and get us another championship.
Coach, how will you address this with your team?
We're going to talk about it. We've always talked about it. Never leave the bench. Never get too high with the highs or low with the lows. It's hard when you're playing. I played this game a long time, and I can't tell you I was a saint at all times. Okay? Your emotions get the best of you. It's unfortunate that the players that got ejected can't be a part of the celebration.
Well, that was, I think, well done on her part. Also, it was her player that did shove an LSU player to the floor, but it was an LSU player that elbowed Ashton Watkins after an intentional foul. Cardoso, the one who was suspended from the opening game of the NCAA tournament, put out a statement last night. She said, "I would like to extend my sincerest apologies for my actions during today's game. My behavior was not representative of who I am as a person or the South Carolina program, and I deeply regret any discomfort or inconvenience it may have caused. I take full responsibility for my actions. Assure you, I am committed to conducting myself with the utmost respect and sportsmanship in the future." Kim Mulkey, the coach of LSU, again, it was her player who was shoved to the floor by Cardoso, but I think she probably could have taken a little higher road than she took when answering questions about this brawl in the post-game news conference.
Do you realize there was only one foul called on each team with 2 minutes to play in the fourth quarter? Are you kidding me? That might have created some of that. Not the way we play. We're going to foul your ass. Not the way they play, they're going to foul your ass. But you only blew that whistle one time? Think about that now. Flau'jae, what I saw, intentionally fouled Fulwiley because she stripped her. Great move, because she's going to get a layup right there. And then some jawing went on with her and another player, and then the next thing I know, Cardoso just waylaid her. And so I ran because somebody came out of the stands. I think it was Flau'jae's brother trying to keep him, from doing anything crazy. But that was all I know. I can't tell you from my bench how many left the court. Obviously, they saw it on film and said everybody had to go. And then I think one player for South Carolina didn't leave the bench. But my question is, I don't really know the rules. Why weren't the coaches tossed if they left the bench? Wouldn't that be a hell of an ending? But I guess it's just the players that leave the bench area. I don't know. It's ugly. It's not good. No one wants to be a part of that. No one wants to see that ugliness. But I can tell you this. I wish she would have pushed Angel Reese. Don't push a kid. You 6'8", don't push somebody that little. That was uncalled for, in my opinion. Let those two girls that were jawing, let them go at it.
Okay, so she's very combative, fits her personality. She was a scrappy point guard when she played, led Louisiana Tech to a national championship, has been coaching a long time, won at Baylor, and is now winning at LSU. But I just think that it could have been handled a little bit differently. Like, she's ready to have her team fight there. And, I think that Dawn Staley did a better job of diffusing it. True, it was her player who did the pushing. Understand that. But, this is probably going to lead to some more things down the road. We'll see what happens in the NCAA tournament. Selection Sunday coming up for both the men and women this week. But, that's and they'll be in, of course, as an at-large team, even though South Carolina won this game. So, I don't know. It's, here we are heading into the most important part of the year in college basketball, the NCAA tournament. And I never thought that we would get to this point where the women are dominating the conversation about college basketball. And over 30 years ago, probably late 80s, Virginia had a very good team. And they had twin stars, the Burgee twins. And they came in and they played Maryland at Cole Fieldhouse, and they drew about 12,000 people there. And Tony Kornheiser wrote a column. He covered that game. And the lead was, "I have seen the future of basketball, and it wears a ponytail." Now, in the 30-plus years since, he's kind of said he's regretted writing that, and it wasn't exactly right. But maybe 30-plus years later, we have reached that point. We have reached the point where the women's game right now, at the moment, is more compelling than the men's game. Will there be a transcendent star next year like Caitlin Clark? I don't know. But she has raised the level and the interest of the game in a way that, most people would not have thought that it would get to this point, and it has. And all congratulations to the women of college basketball to getting it to this point. Coming up, the story of where Ted Leonsis is right now is a lot different than what he trotted out at the end of 2023, standing up there like he had just, split the atom, and he was going to make it right for everybody as we were going to have this new arena in Virginia, which may still happen, but big setback for Ted last week. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
Coming up next hour, we'll have more thoughts on Russell Wilson signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Also, Charlie Casserly talking to John Keim on his podcast and projecting as to how long this rebuild is going to take. Hint, grab a Snickers. This is an organization that never talked about rebuilding under the 24 years that Dan Snyder owned the team. They don't really use that word now, but Charlie's done this. He built an expansion team from the ground with Houston and took over, was the general manager of a team here that won a Super Bowl and had to rebuild under Norv Turner. So he knows about what's involved here, and he has a timeline which is not exactly encouraging, but I think we all realize that it's going to take some time to do this. So I don't know how close you've been following this Ted Leonsis plan to build this monster complex in Virginia. He had that news conference back in December and probably didn't read the room very well when he made it seem like this is going to be so great for everybody. We're building this beautiful complex. And yes, it's Virginia, but you can see D.C., and it's right near National Airport. And did you know National Airport is in Virginia? And did you know that the Monumental Network broadcasts games all the way down to Florida? So we're all like one big region. We're not really a city, and it's not going to be a big deal that we're yanking the Caps and the Wizards out of D.C. He didn't take any questions, and the pushback was pretty severe. Like, listen, the arrogance of this guy and getting in bed with Governor Glenn Youngkin and with this sweetheart deal where the state's going to pay $1.5 billion and he's going to kick in some money. And, looked like he was just going to steamroll this thing through. Well, I don't think old Ted counted on Louise Lucas, 80-year-old Louise Lucas, dunking on his head. And as of Friday, this did not get into the budget. It was turned down by the state Senate, and she is a senator in Virginia, and she speaks her mind, and she let everybody know when she prevented this from getting into the state budget how good she felt about it on Friday.
I'm feeling fantastic.
What were those negotiations like?
Why do you say fantastic?
Because we were able to, I think, save the taxpayers a ton of money by not putting the full faith and credit of the Commonwealth behind that project. People not just from Northern Virginia, but from all over the Commonwealth have sent me text messages and emails and phone calls and saying that they just don't like the idea of putting taxpayers' money behind a project of a billionaire. And so I'm toes down standing with the voters of Virginia.
Sounds like you, some of your colleagues, even Democrats, maybe ruffled a little bit of their feathers by...
Sure. They don't like the idea that I would not allow it to be heard. And it's not something that I do often, but when I feel strongly enough about it, that it's not in the best interest of the Commonwealth, then of course I'll do just as I did with this arena.
Do you think it jeopardizes a couple of the priorities that you were able to get done when they eventually head to the governor's desk?
Yes, I do. But I tell you what, when you feel strongly enough about something, you know you have to make some sacrifices. So I knew I wasn't going to be able to get everything that I wanted because I wasn't going to let him get what he needed or wanted, whichever the case may be.
Is there still any room for compromise? And what's your message to Governor Youngkin, who's about to speak in a few minutes?
Compromise for me? How do you spell that word?
Like retail marijuana, minimum wage. Is he just going to veto everything now?
I suspect that he will be vetoing some things. I don't know exactly what they're going to be yet. But, in this whole scenario, you know that when you stand strongly against something that the governor wants, you know that you're going to lose something. So I anticipate that. So whatever it is. But, he's here for another 2 years. I'm here for 4. So I'll be able to get the things I want.
And what was your biggest objection to the arena? Was it the use of moral obligation bond?
Absolutely, and there were some other things too, and I guess I might as well just say it. Here you have Don Scott, who is the first African-American Speaker of the House. You got Luke Torian, who's the chair of House Appropriations. Got me over here as chair of Senate Finance and Appropriations. The last thing I would want to see while African-Americans have this level of leadership is for this thing to go south. Not on my watch. I wasn't about to take that risk.
Now the question, did Ted do enough to push this thing through? The big story in the Post over the weekend about this, and he did meet with Louise Lucas last Wednesday, the day before the vote. Probably too late on that, and the question is, well, why didn't he approach her earlier? There has been some speculation that the meeting was delayed. Ted wanted to talk to her, but that Youngkin's office, Youngkin's team, said no, don't approach her. Don't handle this. So the Post says that Leonsis called a handful of leaders earlier in the year, including Louise Lucas once. He didn't meet with her, but called her, and House Appropriations Chairman Luke Torian, who she just referred to twice. But otherwise, Youngkin's office and lobbyists were largely the go-betweens. The arrangement might have prevented inadvertent blow-ups on social media, where Lucas is notoriously active and blunt, but it also kept lawmakers from building a personal stake in the project. If they'd have been able to get cozy with Ted, because Ted always thinks, he's very smart and he can convince people to do anything he wants. And as she recounted, he comes into the room to meet her and calls her a badass, which she liked, but she wasn't budging. It wasn't going to happen. Monumental Sports and Entertainment declined to comment for the story in the Post, referring to a statement issued Friday night where they said they remain hopeful that the merits of the proposal will eventually get a fair hearing so this important project can advance for our fans, players, employees, and the residents of Virginia. Chances of that happening, not very good this year. Youngkin could introduce a separate bill or budget amendment for a vote next month, but that doesn't seem likely to happen with the Democrats controlling the General Assembly. The other thing that's a little bit different about this is that in Virginia, you're only one term. So, they can bring this back next year, but Youngkin would be in his last year. He can't run for office again. Can't run for consecutive terms. So, what's the motivation there? I guess he's going to want it for his legacy. He's going to want to say, hey, look what I built while I was governor, because he does have aspirations of being president one day. So, he wants to look what I did for the Commonwealth. And there was a lot of opposition to this project, but we pushed it through, and the tax money that it's bringing in, et cetera, et cetera. I think that this is a win for D.C. for now. The question is, can they mend the fences with Leonsis? Because the story was that while they offered $500 million for refurbishing Capital One Arena, that they changed the terms at the last minute. This is when Ted started looking to Virginia. They changed the terms in that Ted had to put up the money or had to borrow the money, and then they would pay him back, not that they would put up the cash at the beginning. If they go back and they make a deal with Ted, does this complicate things for the Commanders? Because if the district doesn't make a deal with Ted, if Ted yanks his teams out, then they almost have to make a deal with the Commanders. They can't be left with no teams in the nation's capital, so that the leverage now shifts to the Commanders if Ted is able to get this done. If not, could they say to the Commanders, well, we'd like to have you, but we've spent all our money with Ted, and, do they look now, obviously from what's happening here with Virginia, that the Commanders probably aren't going to make a deal with them, and I think of the three possible sites, D.C., Maryland, and Virginia, this would be the least desirable. Landover, which is where they would stay if they make a deal with Maryland, a little bit closer to the Morgan Boulevard metro station, and make that a little bit more palatable, but I don't think many people wanted to stay in Maryland. So a lot of things are in motion here. A lot of balls are in the air. But Ted, who looked so confident and so smug when he was announcing this deal back in December, looks like he got dunked on by an 80-year-old woman. And I still don't think this is completely dead. I would not be surprised if it's brought back next year by Youngkin and they go through this waltz again. In the meantime, can the district step up enough to satisfy Ted? And I would assume that there would be a deal in place that if they have this refurbishment of the arena, that there's got to be a lease extension so he can't up and leave again. But what started out as a victory dance for Ted, he's looking kind of like hat in hand right now. He's not where he was. And thank you to Louise Lucas for getting that done. Coming up in the next hour, more on the Russell Wilson signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Charlie Casserly with some real interesting thoughts about rebuilding and the timeline on that. We'll get to that and more as we continue. It's how long does a rebuild take in the NFL? Yeah, we've seen teams go from worst to first before, but sometimes it's more dysfunction, bad coaching. It's not lack of talent. This Washington team, this roster, is not a talented roster, and it's going to take a while to rebuild it. Charlie Casserly, general manager for the Redskins for over a decade, got the Houston Texans off the ground as their first GM in the early part of this century. Their first year was 2002, and he talked to John Keim about that and other things and what it takes to build a team and good ownership and good communication between coach and general manager, all that covered, and we'll go through the highlights of that coming up in just a bit. The free agency period, it's weird how they do it in the NFL. It technically opens at noon on Wednesday, but noon today begins the legal tampering period. I guess they do it this way because it creates more talk. You know, why can't you just open it up? Just say, gates are open at noon today. Sign who you want. But I guess it draws it out for 3 days, and the NFL has learned how to dominate the calendar. There's no question about that. The only month they don't seem to own is July. They own everything else. And what are we going to talk about between now and the draft? The draft every day. Not much is going to change. Probably not going to be many draft picks traded. We may see something wild happen at the top with the Chicago Bears. They may trade that number one pick. We still don't know what's happening with Justin Fields. And remember, a couple of weeks ago, their GM, Ryan Poles, said, we're going to get that situation straightened out before free agency opens. Well, you're running out of time here because it officially opens on Wednesday, but it's sort of open this afternoon. Now, we're checking to see. I'm looking at Twitter, seeing if anything's happening, and so far haven't seen anything about a Justin Fields trade. But things are starting to happen in the NFL, and there are some big names that are going to be out there, including Kirk Cousins, who could re-sign with the Minnesota Vikings, but the buzz seems to be he's going to wind up in Atlanta. His wife is from there. They obviously need a quarterback. Saquon Barkley is a free agent, and he will probably command the highest price of running backs on the market. But Derrick Henry's out there too. And running backs, unfortunately for them, they just don't command the kind of money that they used to. But there are guys out there, and we're going to see, what spins in the next few days. But late last night, there was a signing that was announced. It's because the Broncos gave Russell Wilson permission to seek his own deal. They know they're going to officially cut him loose on Wednesday, but they said, go shop around. So he went to see the New York Giants, and he went to see the Steelers. And last night made a deal, and it's a good deal for the Steelers, even if it doesn't work out, because they get him on the veterans minimum of $1.2 million, and the Broncos are on the hook for the rest of it, $37.8 million, as he takes, I guess, they'll give him number 3 in Pittsburgh. And he put out on social media last night, year 13, grateful, and then he had a video of the Steelers and their fans with it. Brooke Pryor covers the Steelers for ESPN. She was on last night with Scott Van Pelt and seemed somewhat surprised that this deal actually happened.
When I was in Indianapolis and having conversations with people around the league, the expectation was that it would be Mason Rudolph signing a deal to come back to Pittsburgh, to stay in Pittsburgh, to join Kenny Pickett in that quarterback room for competition going into this season. But Russell Wilson offered an opportunity at something the Pittsburgh Steelers love, and that is a good deal. Because of all of the dead money from Denver, the Steelers only owe Russell Wilson about $1.2 million on this one-year deal, and there's nothing the Steelers loves more than a good deal. And to get a Super Bowl winning quarterback, a 9-time Pro Bowler, for $1.2 million, that's something they just couldn't pass up.
That's interesting. It's the quintessential free roll, but then you do have money and emotional investment in Kenny Pickett, and we know the Pittsburgh story there. Where's this leave him, Brooke?
Well, it leaves him, I think, maybe feeling a little steamrolled by Russell Wilson right now, honestly. I mean, when you bring in a guy of Russell Wilson's caliber, no matter that he's past his prime a little bit at 36 years old, I think that Kenny Pickett's probably feeling frustrated right now because he's got another year left before the team has to make that 5th-year option decision. Another year as a starting quarterback in a new system under Arthur Smith could go a long way to evaluating if he could be the quarterback of the future. Now you bring in Russell Wilson. It feels like this is a much stronger competition than going against Mason Rudolph. In fact, it doesn't really feel like much of a competition. And so Kenny Pickett now is kind of in this purgatory of, will he ever be a starting quarterback again in the league? And will he ever get a chance to prove that he's worthy of that first-round pick? It seems like that door on Kenny Pickett is closing quickly in Pittsburgh.
And it does seem like it was just yesterday that Kenny Pickett was the quarterback of the future. He was a first-round pick locally, played, he was from New York, but he played his college career at Pitt, so he's going to play at the same stadium with the Steelers, and it seemed to be working out early. Last year, he got hurt. Mason Rudolph took over, and that's why you hear Brooke Pryor saying to Scott Van Pelt that she assumed that they were going to run it back and bring Mason Rudolph back on a new contract and let them battle it out. But instead, they bring in a guy who's won a Super Bowl, has been to 9 Pro Bowls, and do you make him the backup? He's making backup money, at least from the Steelers, 1.2, but you just don't do things that way anymore. And so much has changed. And I was thinking, I know it's ancient history, and these are probably prehistoric times for the NFL. I understand that. They didn't have free agency in sports in those days, so you couldn't move from team to team. And if you didn't like it, too bad. That's not the way things work. But Sonny Jurgensen went to the Eagles in 1957, rookie out of Duke, and was their starting quarterback the first year. And he, had some bumps, but he was showing a lot of promise. But they brought in Norm Van Brocklin from the Rams, and Van Brocklin was their starting quarterback for 3 years. Sonny went from starting quarterback to backup in 1958 and 59 and 1960 when they won the NFL championship. And it wasn't until 1961 that he returned as the full-time starter. So there's a 3-year gap where he's backing up Van Brocklin. Van Brocklin retired right after the championship where they beat the Packers and then became coach of the Minnesota Vikings, who are an expansion team, and Sonny took over again. You would think that there might be a possibility that it could work out long-term for Kenny Pickett. He's gotten to play for most of 2 seasons. Now he sits behind Wilson for maybe a year, maybe longer. I mean, if Wilson looks like he's got a lot left in the tank, then the Steelers sign him to a new contract. But if not, it cost them only $1 million just to kick the tires. And Pickett might wait that out, but instead it may cause all kinds of turmoil. And now they got to get rid of Kenny Pickett, and maybe they bring Mason Rudolph back as a backup, and maybe Kenny Pickett goes someplace else and his career develops. There's so much drama now in the NFL. It's so crazy. And speaking of drama, it was 25 years ago. I'm sure this will be celebrated at the draft this year. It was 25 years ago that Mike Ditka, who was the coach and I guess essentially the general manager of the Saints at that time, wanted Ricky Williams, who had slipped to number 5. The Eagles wanted them. Those were the days when, you really valued running backs. So the Eagles fans were really upset when Donovan McNabb was taken number 2 and not Ricky Williams. Williams slid all the way down to 5. Washington was sitting at 5. And Mike Ditka wanted him so much that he traded his entire draft, the entire 1999 draft, to the Redskins so that they could move up a couple of spots and take Ricky Williams, which they did. And then Washington wound up with Champ Bailey, and they wound up with a lot of flexibility with those picks, and they were set up well with the salary cap, and they won the division in 1999. And Dan Snyder wasn't happy. This was his first year as the owner. They were not really a great team. They were just in a year where it was a bad division, where McNabb is a rookie, and the Giants weren't good. The Cowboys have a down year, and they win the division. So the next year he went for it and spent all the cap space that Charlie Casserly had left behind. And the rest of the decade and the decade that followed was stupidity and misery and stupid decisions like that. But Charlie had left them in really good shape when he was pushed out the door. The reason was that they made Vinny the on top of him, and Charlie said, "I'm not going to work for that guy," and he quit and went on to do other things, including becoming general manager of the Houston Texans. So we'll get his thoughts on what he sees for Washington and the rebuilding process and all that coming up. But when we talk about draft, and this happens every year, it's that time of year, the name Ryan Leaf comes up, and especially this year where you have 3 quarterbacks who could go 1, 2, 3 in the draft. And in 1998, when you clearly had 2 that were going to go 1, 2, and there were some who questioned whether Peyton Manning would be 1 and whether Ryan Leaf would actually have the better pro career, But as it turned out, Manning went one, became one of the greatest of all time with the first with the Colts and then with the Broncos, winning a Super Bowl for each team. And Ryan Leaf was a complete bust, out of the league after just, I think, 3 or 4 years, played at the end with the Dallas Cowboys and has gone to jail, has had drug problems, and is back. He's really resuscitated himself really well. He's an analyst now, and he was filling in for Dan Patrick on his show. He's very good on the air now. This was Ryan Leaf last Friday. And he wants, even though I don't think he is, I think it's Jamarcus Russell who's the biggest bust of all time. He was taken number one by the Raiders and basically, flamed out. Wasn't in shape, didn't know the playbook, just wasn't ready for it. Couldn't handle it. And a guy who played really 1 year at LSU, had a rocket arm, unbelievable arm. But there's a lot more to that to playing quarterback. I would make him the biggest bust of all time, but Leaf wants to claim that title.
Every March, every April, the consensus around who's going to be great, who's not going to be great, but they always like to come back to, and I think it's a big reason why my name will never go away, is like we don't want to draft another Ryan Leaf possibly. So instead of having any more polls, and I'm sorry, Seton, this may end your polls for March.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're just about to get into Ryan Leaf season.
Yes.
We said kind of dabbled in it yesterday, but now.
Yeah, we're putting the kibosh to it.
Yeah,
It's over now, all right? There's no more, who's the biggest bust of all time. You don't have to drag any of the names in there anymore, all right? Let's just say it's me, okay? From now on. It's just like, you don't have to have an argument around who's the greatest basketball player of all time. It's Michael Jordan, okay? We don't need to talk LeBron. Yeah, it's great, but we don't have to have that conversation anymore. We know what's true. And what we know is true is this. So we don't have to talk about anybody else. So, all the Twitterverse or X, when you want to do polls about that around draft time, you don't have to do it anymore. There could be a GIF. There could be a meme. Let's make one up that just now is just a post of that.
You're the Usain Bolt of this situation.
I am the greatest of all time.
Are you taking ownership right now of?
Well, I feel like I've taken ownership for a long time of it. People just haven't been willing to accept it.
Yeah.
So if you look at your situation, Ryan,
Yes.
as a person who knows you, the reason you are always in that conversation of the biggest bust of all time is because of the draft and who was drafted ahead of you. Imagine if you were drafted 1 and Peyton were drafted 2. And it would be an even bigger situation because it's a little bit like, I would say there's contenders. Jamarcus Russell is one of the biggest busts of all time.
Well, there's a lot of money there.
Yes.
And I think he was uber talented. And I think there's been I think he's got a bit of mystery behind him. He kind of disappeared. Ryan just flat out got in your face everybody all the time, whether it was good or bad. Like, oh, dude's out there. He's warranting maybe that badge he's wearing.
But let's look at the NBA equivalent. Greg Oden was taken number 1. Kevin Durant was taken number 2. They're intertwined. It makes Greg Oden look worse because he didn't do much, mostly because of injury, to be
Mostly
fair.
because of injuries.
And then, then Kevin Durant is a first ballot Hall of Famer. If Peyton Manning is average, you don't get nearly as much coverage.
Most likely. And it's usually a part of when I'm out there speaking, I talk about it. I say, when I walked out of prison, I think my biggest fear was that I would have to be in the public eye. Because the day after I walked out, I was sitting at home, and I should be just grateful and thankful and everything. I slept in a real bed for the first time. Mom made some breakfast. But in the hometown newspaper, in the Great Falls Tribune, where I was supposed to be the hero, right? The guy, the only Montanan who's ever been drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. But instead, I have become this person. And there was a cartoon in the paper, and it went, "Lock up your medicine cabinets, Ryan Leaf's out." And I remember thinking like, oh yeah, there's no hope. This is what my life is. And so I had to think differently. Like there had to be 180 degree different kind of thought process around that. And it really was ultimately a mindset of ownership. And I found that in the accountability piece when I was in there. Like when I walked by the mirror one time, I just said, Ryan, you're here because of what you did, no one else. And once you do that, once you say that, like you can't blame anybody else. I mean, it's the simplest fact of it all. Like it doesn't matter what someone said, did, thought, this or that. What was my part in it? And that has been like a real sticking point for me over the last 10 years. Plain and simple. We as human beings tend to just complicate things so immensely rather than, doing the simplest thing. And that was just to own it. So no more polls around that. All right.
Ever?
So, ever. No more polls. It doesn't need to be done. It's done. It's written, and it's now like we're going to do history later, right? History of sports on this date.
Yeah.
On this date in 2024, it was resolved. Ryan Leaf was the NFL's biggest bust of all time. Doesn't have to be talked about again.
Two things really contribute to that narrative. One, which Paul mentioned, Paul Pabst, who's a producer on the show, that Manning became such a star. So the contrast of 1 and 2 was so great. The other thing was that the video that surfaced while Leaf was flaming out with the Chargers of him yelling at a reporter, "Don't talk to me, don't talk to me." That's been played over and over again. And on top of that, even after he was out of the NFL, he stayed in the news for all the wrong reasons. The multiple arrests, the drug problems, the headline that was in the paper that he mentioned there about, lock up your medicine cabinets. That's what he was arrested for. He broke into a neighbor's house and was stealing prescription drugs. That's how big the problem was. And so we've continued to talk about him for everything but good football play ever since he came out of Washington State in 1998. And here we are 26 years later, and we're looking back on the all-time bust. I don't know if he is. There are other contenders along the way. There's a contender in Washington, and I'm not talking about Robert Griffin III, who had one spectacular year here. We can debate back and forth whether or not he was a bust. But a long time ago, before that, 1968, the Redskins traded a first-round pick for Gary Beban, who had won the Heisman Trophy at UCLA. He was going to be the heir apparent to Sonny Jurgensen. Never took a snap at quarterback. Played a little running back, a little wide receiver. Was out of the NFL in 2 years. So it's when you talk about bust, the other factors besides football, the arrests, the constantly in the news, the comebacks, the failures, the books, all those things. That's why Leaf gets all this attention. I don't know if he's the biggest bust of all time. It certainly is a bust. And Bobby Beathard, who's in the Hall of Fame and should be in the Hall of Fame, was a great general manager here, made a huge mistake there. He knew that he needed a franchise quarterback. Leaf had the talent to be the franchise quarterback. The problem was the other aspects of this, which make drafting so hard. You can't predict how he was going to be able to handle the money and the fame and everything that went along with it, and he handled it absolutely poorly. He was terrible at it. And, in terms of his football talent, in the right set of circumstances with the right attitude, he might have become one of the all-time greats because he was that good at Washington State. Washington State had no business playing in the Rose Bowl. How many other times have they been there since they played Michigan in that Rose Bowl? They lost, but he got them there. That's Washington State, Pullman, Washington. It's not exactly the most attractive place to play football, and he was good enough to do that, but the problems off the field led to his football demise, but good that he's back, and as you can hear, he's very good on the air. He is really interesting to listen to. Also is Charlie Casserly, and Casserly talked over the weekend or late last week with John Keim, who does a podcast, and Charlie's thoughts on rebuilding this organization and what he sees from the outside looking in. We'll get to that next. It's the Andy Pollin Show, ESPN 630.
The Andy Pollin Show on ESPN 630, the sports capital.
All right, we got Tony coming up at 11 o'clock today on what is a beautiful day outside our windows, but a little colder than the 50-some degrees would indicate because of the wind, but we're supposed to have 70s the rest of the week. Nice. So Charlie Casserly's been gone from D.C. For a long time. I want to say gone from running a team in D.C. because he lives here, likes it here, big Nats fan. And his story is really, really inspirational for people who think about wanting to do something and not doing it. He did it. He was a high school coach in New Jersey, doing well. And he thought, if I don't try this, I'll never do it. And he had a burning desire to work for an NFL team. He wanted to become what he ultimately became, which was a general manager. But he had no pro experience. His coaching experience was at the high school level. He hadn't even coached in college. And there were two teams coming in 1976 as expansion teams, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Seattle Seahawks, making it 28 teams in the NFL. He sent letters to all 28, including these two brand new franchises, saying, I'll do anything. I just want a shot. Only one team responded. That was the Washington Redskins and their coach and general manager, George Allen, who sent him back a letter and said, yeah, come on in. And so he showed up at Redskin Park, which was near Dulles Airport at the time. It was in Northern Virginia, but they moved some years later. But he showed up there with his, all his belongings in his car. And George Allen said, yeah, I got work for you, but it wasn't a paying job. It was an unpaid internship. And Charlie took it. And I guess he had saved enough money to stay at the YMCA for a while. And he did everything. He got coffee, he filled water bottles, he did whatever they needed him to do, but he got inside the door, and that ultimately led him to become a scout and then assistant general manager to Bobby Beathard. And when Bobby Beathard left the team after the 1989 draft, Charlie took over, and Charlie did a very good job in what they called Plan B free agency at that time. It wasn't full free agency in 1990, 91. But he brought in some guys under this new plan, and they had their last Super Bowl and probably the best team they ever had, the 1991 Redskins. And that was Charlie Casserly as the GM. And then Dan Snyder came in, and like most of what Dan Snyder touched, he messed up and pushed Charlie out the door. Charlie went to work for the Houston Texans, was their original GM. And then when that ended, he got into broadcasting. It was with the NFL Network. I don't think he's still doing that. But still around, still very vibrant, and still very knowledgeable about the inner workings of the NFL. And when he came on John Keim's podcast last week, John asked him his thoughts on the new ownership, Josh Harris.
He's going to have to learn the league. What do I mean by that? Going to learn who to trust, who not to trust. That takes some time. But if you look at the things, I mean, he attacked the stadium, and he's obviously very quiet what he does. So his plans on trying to get a stadium built, which was a 10-year odyssey for Jack Kent Cooke. Yeah. So let's not expect this to happen soon. But he knows how to do that part of it, and he's doing it quietly, which is good. He's trying to improve the present stadium. They're going to play there, so he's doing the right thing there. If you look at it from the outside in, he brought in Rick Spielman, which I thought was an excellent move. Rick is a experienced general manager. He knows the league. He knows who to call. He knows who to trust. I thought that was a good move there. You could see that from the outside in, he's involved in some things. He's a listener in others. He goes to the combine. He sits in on the quarterback meetings. He's going to let other people make the decision, but he's doing the thing he should do. I don't think there's anything wrong with an owner going to do that. If I owned a team, I'd do that, right? So he's learning his people. He's learning the players. I'm sure he'll be active in free agency as far as spending the money. So I think I've got to give him an A so far. But again, it goes back to people I know him, but different parts of his career give him high marks, and I value their judgment.
So I thought that last part was interesting from Charlie there about Josh Harris being in the meetings with the interviews for the quarterbacks at the combine. There's a lot of pushback on that. Oh, God, meddling owner. Can't let the GM do his business. Charlie doesn't work for the team anymore. So he would be free to say, hey, as a GM, you got to have autonomy over that. You can't have your owner looking over your shoulder while you're doing your work. No, he's saying he's okay with that, and I'm sure that Adam Peters would say the same thing. I think people overreacted to that. As I think gets credit for this is my friend is saying friends of mine have said, let's put it that way, including Kevin Sheehan. That there's post-Snyder syndrome, like post-traumatic stress syndrome, post-traumatic Snyder syndrome on this, like, oh, God, the owner's meddling. No, I don't think that's the case. This is more from Charlie on good ownership. He didn't work for, I think it was only, a couple of months that he worked for Dan Snyder, because remember, Charlie made that move with the Saints and Ditka giving up its entire draft so they could take Ricky Williams. That was in April of 1999. Snyder takes over officially in May of 99, a month later, And Charlie was pushed out the door a week before training camp. Like, they're getting ready to go to camp in late July, and then there's an announcement that Charlie Casserly, quote unquote, resigned. That didn't happen in a normal organization. The narrative was, he couldn't get along with Norv Turner. No, it turns out that Danny wanted to demote him, and he wanted to make Vinny the top guy, and Charlie wasn't having any of that. So he knows. He worked for Jack Kent Cooke, and then he worked for the McNair family, Bob McNair, when he was hired at Houston. So he's seen good and bad ownership, and this is what he says about what it takes to be a good owner.
I worked for a veteran owner and a rookie owner. Okay, 2 rookie owners. With the little bit I was with Dan Snyder, there's a huge difference between the 2 of them. Jack Kent Cooke, along with his son John Kent Cooke, they've been there forever. It seemed. Okay, so they understood the ups and downs. Okay, simple point. Jack Kent Cooke listened to the head coach, the general manager, and nobody else. Okay, and then he listened to his son off on the side, not with us in the room. Okay, so that's it. Okay, you get into other situations, they're listening to anybody and everybody. Okay, that becomes a problem. They don't know who to listen to. They don't know what the agendas of people are. Jack Kent Cooke always gave us, and John Kent Cooke always gave us the resources to win. Now, it wasn't a blank check, I can tell you that. There was some knockdown, drag-out battles. But what they were doing is testing you. They weren't stopping you. They were testing you. Okay, do you really believe this? Okay, do you really think you got to do this? You always won the argument. Okay, but you better be right with the argument. So that's fine. We understood that. Okay, so you have those things. So it starts with ownership. Then the head coach. It's the single most important hire. You know, I work for 2 Hall of Fame head coaches. That's rare. George Allen at the end of his career in Washington, Joe Gibbs through his entire career. Okay, so you have a great coach. And what makes a great coach? Well, the first thing is he's smart enough to hire a great staff. If you look at the staffs of George Allen and Joe Gibbs, they're great staffs. Okay. So you start with ownership, giving you the things you need, and time and patience is one of them. You got a great coach, okay? We can talk about what makes a great coach. And then you bring in the personnel people, okay, that work with the head coach, and we can talk about that, getting the players to fit the system to win. So it's all of the above things that you have to have in place, okay? So to me, that's what makes a winning organization.
And when the head coach comes in, it's not just the head coach, it's who he brings in to work with him. And all those years that Gibbs was here in the first go-round, the assistants were household names. That doesn't happen in every place. But these were guys who were loyal to Gibbs. Gibbs was very good about giving them credit. He managed the staff very well. And it all started when he was hired by Jack Kent Cooke in 1981. Here's the story of that with Charlie Casserly.
When he went in to meet with Jack Kent Cooke, he came in there and he says, Mr. Cooke, and he gave a list of 9 names. Okay. And he's Mr. Cooke, these are good coaches, but they have good jobs. Okay. So Jack Kent Cooke said to him, and you've been around Mr. Cooke, he says, I'm going to get every one of them for you. Okay. Then he turns to Bobby Beathard. Don't come back without him. Okay. So when he gave you the don't come back without him, there was no other question. You walked out of the room and you got him, and Bobby got, I think, 8 of the 9, which was credit to Bobby. Okay. But here's the thing. The telling thing is one of the NFC coaches, who was very prominent at the time, made a comment when he looked at that staff. He says, oh boy, they got hell of a staff there. Okay. So right off the bat, people stood up, and Joe kept that as he lost a coach. He lost Joe Bugle. He replaced him with Jim Hannafin, another Hall of Fame offensive line coach. You know, Dan Henning, you bring in Jerry Roan, who was a great coach, who was a coordinator at the time in Seattle, very successful. So that part, the single most important thing you do is hire people. That was Joe Gibbs. Okay. So the other thing with Joe is his ability to adapt. He won Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks, adapted his system in time, came in with a standard NFL offense, and this isn't going to work against Lawrence Taylor. Right. Okay. So he went back to the 2 tight end offense. So he had tight end covering Lawrence Taylor. So he had a plan to block Lawrence Taylor, the single greatest defensive football player of all time. Guess what? He's in the division twice a year. Right. So he adapted. Okay. And he could coach different personalities. I mean, if you just looked at him, he said, he'd never coached Dexter Manley or John Riggins. He coached them both. Okay. He had a way to reach them, and he had a way to get them to conform and to play for him. So the things he did that were great is the staff, like you pointed out. Okay. His ability to adapt his offense to the players he had and to coach different personalities. So And that's why he's in the Hall of Fame in racing. Ability to pick people. Single most important thing you do is hire people.
Charlie Casserly, with some ground we've covered a lot over the years, what made Joe Gibbs successful. This, I thought, was the most interesting part of the conversation that he had with John Keim, and they talked for 20, 25 minutes, something like that. This is about how long this is going to take. We know this is a rebuild situation, but how do you measure that? This is kind of a metric for how long it takes to rebuild a football team, or in the case of what he did in Houston, build it from the ground up. Listen to how Charlie lays this out, and if you look at the roster that they have now, outside of Terry McLaurin, John Allen, maybe 2 or 3 others, Sam Cosmi, I mean, there's not many that you could look at this list of players and say, yeah, these guys are going to be with you in 3 years, and they're going to be building a team that can contend. So this is what Charlie says it's going to take and what the rebuild process involves.
When I went to Houston, we did a study, okay, of teams that turn it around in 3 years. So give them 3 years and he'll turn it around. If not, get rid of them. What we did is we did a study on teams that, quote, turn it around. When they, quote, again, turned it around, made the playoffs after 3 years, 12 of their starters were already in place. So they only added 10 starters in 3 years. Okay, so think about that now, okay? So are there 12 starters here that will be here in 3 years, okay, that could give you a winning football team? Now, they're not all pros, okay, but they're good players, okay? I don't know if they have that.
Yeah.
Okay, so sometimes it takes more than 3 years on that part there. Turning the culture around, I don't think there was a bad culture with Ron Rivera, so I don't think that's a problem, okay? Ron Rivera, didn't have enough good players at the end, I think, okay? I mean, that's kind of it, and maybe some of his staff decisions, didn't pan out the way he'd hoped them to pan out, okay? So I think that culture, I don't think that'd be a problem at all. Not at all, okay? Now, he's adding players. I mean, they're tearing it down. They traded Montez Sweat, okay? That was a big one, okay? To be honest with you, I wouldn't have traded Montez Sweat, okay? That I wouldn't have done. I understand Chase Young had injury issues, okay? I could see where you had to walk away from that one. So now getting the players. Now he's part of the process, okay? But so is the general manager, so is the staff he brings in. So it's going to be all of the above things there to get him enough players. I don't think they have 12 guys now that'll line up and start in 3 years. That's just an impression from the outside in.
So I've never heard it worded like that. That really gives you a blueprint there. Not that, that's the be-all, end-all, and not that a great draft and a great haul in free agency couldn't change things dramatically over the next 2 to 3 years. But what he's saying is, if you look at the roster now and you project where it's going to be in 3 years, do you have 12 guys on this current roster who project to be starters? No. I mean, it's pretty clear. Maybe not even half of that. So that indicates that it's going to be maybe more than 3 years before they build a playoff team. In the meantime, what they do between the GM, Adam Peters, and the coach, Dan Quinn, is going to be huge. And this is Charlie laying out the dynamic. Now, he kind of inherited this. Remember, when he took over as the general manager in 1990, Gibbs had been on the job for 10 years. So it wasn't like they came in together like Peters and Quinn. But once these two guys get together and they start to work, here's how Charlie says it has to work.
I think, first of all, vision from the head coach. Keep it simple, stupid, okay? Joe Gibbs, quarterback, arm strength was huge to him. Toughness, intelligence, okay? That's why you take Mark Rippon in the 6th round, because it's a 6th-round pick, okay? All right, Bill Cowher, okay? Another Hall of Fame coach. Houston were going 34 defense. Dom Capers knew it, I didn't, okay? So I wanted to learn a 34 defense. So I went right to Pittsburgh. It was the only team running 34 defense in the year 2000. Okay, and we played 2002. So I met with Bill Cowher, met with Kevin Colbert, respected them both. And I go to Cowher. I says, "Okay, what do you need an outside linebacker? Pass rusher. How big? Pass rusher. How fast? Pass rusher. I got it. James Harrison, the guy they had was 5'11". Now they cut him 3 or 4 times. Okay, so this is exactly, they drafted this guy to do it. But if you were in the Parcells system, there was a certain height and weight and I guess speed that what that guy had to look like. Okay, so it's kind of understanding that part of it. Have a clear picture for your scouts that is simplistic, that they can follow. That's number one. Gibbs always had that. He was great at that. Okay. And the offensive line, Joe Bugle, knock him off the ball. Richie Pettibone, we got to have speed and man-to-man at the cornerback position. Safety, the guy got to be a Phi Beta Kappa to call the defense. That's fine. Right. We get it. Okay. Now we're going to bring a guy in who's smart. All right. We understand that. So that's the vision that you have to lay. That starts the collaboration. The general manager's job is to make sure the scouts understand that. Okay. However you get there. We would have the position coaches come in and talk about it. We'd have the scouts travel with the position coaches. Okay. We'd look at tape with the coaches. Okay. So that's how we collaborated. Okay. And ultimately, we know somebody's got to make the decision. In the Redskin or Washington system, the head coach made the decision on the roster. The general manager made the decision on the draft. Everything else was mutual. Okay. All right. But there was collaboration. Our coaches went on the road with us as scouts to see the players. We looked at tape together. Free agency, we sat down and looked at tape together. We did that certainly in Houston. In Washington, we did it too. Probably not as much, but that depended on the coaching staff that we're involved with. Okay. So that's what we mean by collaboration. Okay. The draft room, Bobby Beathard did this. Everybody was in the draft room, all the scouts, even the young guys. There was no behind the door closed meetings. I ran it the same way. Why? Your young guys get to learn. Everybody sees how the decision is made. Everybody understands at the end of the day, somebody's going to make that decision. But the thing is, everybody has something to add to it. Every coach has something to add to it at his position, the coordinator, and obviously the head coach. So that's collaboration.
So that tells you about building a team, that you go after the players that you want, not the players that everybody else wants. The Albert Hainsworth disaster was because Dan Snyder was chasing another shiny object. And there wasn't any head coach structure. There was Jim Zorn, who later expressed amazement. Wow, it was great to sit in the room and watch Dan Snyder work. No, you dope. You got to know whether this guy fits your locker room or not, or whether he fits your scheme or what you're trying to do. And that's what Casserly's telling you. The coach and the GM have to work together and come up with a guy who fits in the plan that they put together. I don't think there really was much of a plan when Zorn was here. I don't know if there really was much with Jay Gruden, although he tried to do things, and Snyder would go and get people he didn't want, like Dwayne Haskins. So, he didn't have much of a fighting chance. And I thought that Mike Shanahan would have more control than he actually had. So what Casserly's telling is coach, GM, GM was in on the hiring of the coach, which I think is important here, where Quinn was already was hired after Peters was the GM. So those things add up. And, if you follow what Charlie's, not that Charlie's the greatest GM of all time, but he did win a Super Bowl, was successful, and he's telling you what it takes to do that. And that's something that we never heard, never a plan as to build a team. And that part about having 12 players on your roster in 3 years down the road, do you have enough to supplement that with 10 more who will be starters? We'll see. And right now, it doesn't look like they have 12 potential starters 3 years down the road on the team right now. All right, Tony's coming up next. I'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.